Welcome to this web series, The Frugal Mindset, also known as Money and the Responsible Christian. This is the 8th and final segment of our Frugal Mindset Money Skills section of the webinar, but it is our 18th segment overall. And in this segment, we're going to discuss the dreaded B word, budgeting. In the 11th segment of this webinar, we discussed the 4 frugal questions. And then in the 12th, we discussed the 3 need questions. And I think the frugal mindset approach is frankly superior to budgeting in terms of gaining and maintaining control over your financial situation. Nevertheless, some of you enjoy that B word, budgeting, and I am going to discuss how you might budget. First of all, I mentioned about how my parents used to budget. They had a metal strong box, and they had envelopes in all kinds of different categories, and they would put money in those envelopes for that particular budget. Some of the categories you might have in your budget would include groceries, housing, automobile, healthcare, entertainment, pets, debt service, clothing, etc. In preparing a budget, it's still critical that you distinguish between needs and wants, as we discussed with the 4 frugal questions and the 3 need questions. However, if you want to budget, let's talk about how to do that. You will recall we had a couple of key worksheets in our earlier segments. We had a net worth statement and a cash flow statement, and then for some of our examples, we did a potential savings analysis. Now, the net worth statement is relative to budgeting only in the sense of trying to figure out where you need to go and where you need to make changes. But the cash flow statement and the potential savings analysis are critical to budgeting. Now, for Single Mary, if you recall, we only did the cash flow statement. We did not do a potential savings analysis because she was doing pretty well. But let's go back to the cash flow statement for Single Mary. Okay, here again we have Single Mary's cash flow statement for January. If you remember, she had income twice a month of $1,100 for a total income in January of $2,200 from wages, and then another $100 a gift from her mother. So she had a total income of $2,300. And then let's look at the outflows. Groceries, housing, clothing, transportation, healthcare, entertainment, giving. You can see these categories are pretty close to what I just discussed as far as categories for a budget. It's very easy to turn the cash flow statement into a budget for Mary. So here's Single Mary spent $170 on groceries in January. So she might want to do a budget of $170 or thereabouts. Housing, well, we have the amount she spent here. What is that about? I don't know, $700 and some dollars, $750 plus dollars. Clothing, she only spent $35. Maybe she wants to up her budget on clothing a little bit. Maybe that's enough. I don't know what she does for a living. Transportation, auto insurance and gas, that's probably something that's very reasonable. So that's just over $100, $110. Healthcare, she probably can't modify that. That's $150. Entertainment, she might want to budget a little bit more every month for entertainment. Giving, she's tithing. That's great. And then phone service. As we discussed, there are probably less expensive phone options available, but that's not certainly unreasonable. She had a positive cash flow of $700. If you remember, on her net worth statement, her net worth was very low and she didn't have any cash savings. So she can very easily put in a budget that she's going to include $500 a month for reserves or $700 a month for reserves until she gets a good emergency fund build up, and then she can start saving for other things. Maybe she's going to want to replace her car, or maybe she's going to want to buy a house. Who knows? But she certainly can start saving, and she's in very nice shape. But you can very easily use her cash flow statement and turn that into a budget. Now it gets a little more difficult. Let's look at the next one. All right, we're looking at Single Jim's savings analysis or potential savings analysis. You recall he had a little over $4,800, actually a little over $5,000 of income, and he had a very high housing expense, and he actually had a slight negative cash flow for the month of January. But we found over $1,800 savings that he could create if he decided to change his spending habits. And one of the biggest issues with Jim is whether he's going to keep his home. And I don't think it's unreasonable for Jim to try to keep the home, even though his housing expense is very high for somebody of his income level. All right, so let's take that savings analysis and then it very easily turns into a budget. Let's take a look. This is essentially the same document. All right, here's the monthly budget for single Jim, and all the colors are different. It's the exact same information. Here's his income and other inflows. Here's the outflows. This is what he spent in January, and with that, we came up with a budget. He decided he could save a little bit of money, and so we decided Jim's priority was going to be to continue to make payments on his house and try to get that house paid off eventually. And to do that, he's going to have to either find a little more income or find a little savings somewhere. So he decided his grocery budget was going to be $300, just a little off what he spent in January, and certainly if he deletes the pop and candy, that would do that for him. Housing, he's decided he's not going to make any changes there. He's going to continue to pay for his house. Expenses, maybe he could turn the electricity and gas bills down a little bit and save a little bit of money there, but that's the only potential savings he could make there. So his housing budget is the full amount. Clothing, there he could make a significant savings. He spent $365 at TJ Maxx. Let's assume he does need some kind of clothing budget, but we've changed that to only $100 a month because he doesn't need to spend that amount of money. Transportation, he's pretty much going to have to spend what he has been spending on transportation. Healthcare, well, this is a plus because the dentist was probably a once a year or twice a year expense. And so he doesn't have to spend that $600, but he is going to have some savings to cover that dentist so he doesn't have to put it on his credit card like all the other expenses. You recall we talked about, the difference between monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, bi-yearly, and yearly expenses, and you have to make that adjustment to monthly expense when you're figuring out your budget. And you have to keep those dollars. If it's a once a year expense, then you have to make sure you're putting that money away so when you go to pay that expense, you don't have to borrow to do so. But anyway, healthcare, he certainly doesn't have to pay that $600, but maybe that we've got a healthcare budget of $400. I don't know if that extra $50 a month is going to be enough, but maybe it is. Entertainment, he can cut some there. He's going to cut his entertainment way back, or he's going to get some additional income, but for the time being, he's going to cut his entertainment way back. Church, he's going to continue doing his tithing. And then life insurance, he's going to eliminate, and he's going to buy a cheaper phone plan. So his total budget is going to be $4,000 a month on a total income of $5,000 a month. So he's going to save $967 that he's going to be able to put to paying off debt. I believe Jim had some debt he had to pay off and then work on an emergency savings plan and then work on other savings. So even if he doesn't get another job, he's probably going to be okay. And if he can get another part-time job, that would be even better. So you can see how easily the cash flow statement turns into a budget. Now let's look at our couple who are having problems financially. All right, let's go back to Allison and Andy. If you recall, they're our older couple who had a house they had a little bit of equity in. They're upside down on a 4Runner. They have a pickup they own free and clear. And Andy had recently had a heart attack or a stroke or something, and he couldn't work anymore. And Allison was the main breadwinner, though she was nearing retirement. And in retirement, her income was only going to be $1,100 a month. So they're really not doing very well financially. They have very low net worth, very little savings for retirement, and they have credit card debt. Let's look at their cash flow statement, and we'll see how the cash flow statement very easily turns into the potential saving analysis, and the potential savings analysis easily turns into a budget. So let's look at the cash flow statement. All right, here's the cash flow statement for January for Allison and Andy. And remember, I changed the numbers to see how it would look once Allison retired. But let's go back to what Allison's current income is, which was $2,100 twice a month. All right, so this shows Allison's total inflows and then the different categories they were spending money on. So total inflow was $7,200, total outflow was $6,900, and they've got all kinds of debt, all kinds of, remember they spent a lot of money on entertainment, eating out. Yeah, they're not doing very well. Remember, she also spent a lot of money shopping. So let's go back to the potential savings analysis. I did the same thing here. I had changed her income to the $1,100 a month in retirement to see how that was going to look. But for the moment, she's still got the $2,200 twice a month. So they're hanging in there barely, but the total inflow was $7,200, total outflow $6,900. But when we did our potential, so they had just a positive cash flow of $270. But they have a potential saving analysis of $3,200, and they're going to have to do most of those things, and/or Allison is going to have to maintain some kind of part-time job. And you remember there were all kinds of things that they could cut out or cut back on, including, I'm afraid they're not going to be able to maintain that house no matter how hard they work at it, because they're just not going to be able to do that. Their housing expense, let's see, where was their housing expense? Here it is, $2,400, $2,500, $6,700, $2,700 a month. And if all they're getting is the $2,800 from Andy plus 11, $3,900 a month in income won't support that kind of housing expense. So they're going to have to do something different. So let's, in their potential saving analysis from housing, they could rent a nice place for $1,500 a month, and then they would save on the gas and electric because that was included. So that's just what they're going to have to do. All right, let's take a look at a potential budget for Allison and Andy. You recall we started with the cash flow analysis, which just is a list of the various items of money in, money out in categories. So the money in was wages and Social Security, and then the money out, groceries, housing, etc. as we go down. Then we list them, money in, money out. So that was the basic cash flow analysis. Then to help evaluate it, we added the potential savings analysis, asking whether a particular expense was a need, and then whether there was a cheaper alternative available, and then noting what the potential savings was if we either eliminated the expense or we found a cheaper alternative. Now we go to our budget, our itemized budget, and our total budget. So you can see how these just logically flow one from another potentially. So let's go and look at these now. So we are looking at Allison and Andy's wages as they currently exist, not as they're going to exist shortly where Allison also retires. So we've got the income, $2,200 twice a month from Allison plus Andy's Social Security. Then we start looking at the outflows. So we've got groceries. They're spending just under $400 a month. We decided to budget $400 for groceries. And the thing we have to remember is if once they cut back on their eating out, maybe the grocery budget's going to have to go up a little bit. But we're going to start with a $400 budget for groceries and see how that does. It might ultimately have to go up a little bit, maybe $450 or something. And let's look at housing here. If you recall, they're paying $2,400 a month house payment. They're also paying for garbage, gas, and electric. They could rent a place for $1,500 a month, and then the only other expense they would have was garbage. So that would be a significant savings. So we've assumed that's what they're going to do. Maybe they play with it and they decide they want to try to maintain the house. But for now, we're going to budget for them $1,535. Assume they make the decision that, yeah, they're not going to be able to maintain this long term, so they might as well move ahead with a better plan now. So they come up with a $1,535 a month budget for housing, clothing. Obviously, this was somewhere that they can make a very significant change. Allison's spending a lot of money on clothing right now, and they're spending almost $600 a month. We're budgeting them just $50 a month, and frankly, for the first period of time, maybe a couple of years. They could go down to zero for a year or two, or at least very close to it. But in any event, we budgeted $50 a month there. Transportation, this is another one where they have a significant decision to make, depending upon whether they want to maintain the pickup or whether they want to try to get on top of the 4Runner. But remember, they're upside down in the 4Runner, so even if they sell the 4Runner, they're going to have to come up with some cash for the difference of what they're going to owe on it. So in any event, we've assumed they are going to get rid of the 4Runner, and so we budgeted, instead of almost $700 a month, we budgeted $172 a month for transportation expense. Health insurance, remember, healthcare, excuse me, this was another area that probably is going to be somewhat different. First of all, I don't know why the health insurance is that high if they're both at Social Security age, Medicare age. But in any event, what we have assumed here is, for some reason, the health insurance is very expensive, and they're going to maintain the prescriptions, but they're not going to have this procedure on a regular basis. And so we budgeted $650 a month there. Then entertainment. Here again, very significant changes, at least until they get on top of their finances. Spending almost $1,000 a month. They're going to cut way back. They're going to eat at home, and we budgeted only $50 a month there. Then giving, they're actually very chintzy on the giving, and hopefully when they get their finances in better order, they can maybe be more generous there. But we budgeted what they've been giving, just $100 a month. And then other, here we've got the Visa minimum payments. Once they get these balances paid off, then that'll go away. And we're assuming when they sell their house, they're going to get enough out of that to deal with the money owed on the 4Runner, and also to get rid of these Visa payments. So we don't have anything budgeted for Visa payments because we're assuming they're going to get those paid off. Phone service, they'll get a cheaper phone plan, and she doesn't need to contribute to her IRA at this stage of the game. She needs to work on paying down debts and creating some savings. So what we have here is just $50. So a total budget now of just over $3,000, as opposed to what they've been spending, which is almost $7,000. And that creates a huge net inflow to them of almost $4,200. And, you know, once they, if she works for another 6 months and they can get some of these things straightened out and they can get some savings in the bank, you know, that'd be great. Then they could have an emergency fund and have a fund to maybe start making progress on something else. But you remember, she's about to retire. So let's go back to the top and the inflow and see how this would work when she's only making $1,100 once a month. All right, now we've got the income change to what we're assuming her retirement income would be, where she's only making $1,100 a month. Let's go down. So the total inflow for the family is $3,900, but the budget is just $3,000. So they still have a positive cash flow. If they can get some of these financial problems straightened around, they're going to be doing really well. So hopefully that's what Allison and Andy can do. So that's how you take the cash flow analysis and or the potential savings analysis and turn them into a budget. I still think for most of us, we'd be better off using the 4 frugal questions and the 3 need questions and look at each item as we spend it rather than budgeting, because frankly, you're going to have more savings that way, and you're going to be happier, and you're going to be spending your money in a smarter way if you follow those 4 frugal questions and 3 need questions. But if you want a budget, now I've given you at least a version of how to budget. This is the last segment of our Frugal Mindset Money Skills section of the webinar. In the next section of the webinar, we're going to discuss various and sundry money-saving techniques and miscellaneous topics. The very next one is going to be about extended warranties. Thanks for listening.